In a cramped office at the Paris Prefecture of Police, a young clerk sits surrounded by drawers of paper. Each card is supposed to name a criminal. None of them really can. A thief gives a false name, walks free, and offends again under a third name the following spring. The police can fill a room with files and still not know who is standing in front of them. The clerk is 26, awkward, half-deaf, and quietly furious at the disorder. His name is Alphonse Bertillon, and he is about to ask a strange question. What if you could not lie about the size of your own skull? Bertillon was born in Paris in 1853 into a household obsessed with counting people. His father, Louis-Adolphe Bertillon, was a physician and statistician. His grandfather helped popularize the very word demography. Numbers about human beings were the family business. Alphonse himself was not a promising student. He was dismissed from posts, struggled to hold attention, and landed at the prefecture in 1879 as a lowly copyist, transcribing the descriptions of arrested men. Those descriptions were almost useless. Tall, medium build, brown hair, ordinary face. He looked at thousands of them and saw not crime, but a measurement problem waiting for a solution. His idea was simple and a little ruthless. The human skeleton, once a person reaches adulthood, barely changes. So instead of trusting names or vague descriptions, you record the body itself. Bertillon chose a set of careful measurements taken with calipers and gauges. The length and width of the head, the length of the left foot, the middle finger, the forearm or cubit, the height sitting and standing. Combine enough of these, and the odds of two unrelated people matching on all of them, he argued, became vanishingly small. A name could be faked. A face could be disguised. A measured skeleton, he believed, could not. At first, his superiors were unimpressed. A clerk lecturing the police about calipers was easy to ignore. Bertillon pushed anyway, refining his method in his own time at the prison, drilling officers to take each measurement the same way every time. Precision was everything. Two men measuring the same prisoner had to arrive at the same numbers, or the whole system collapsed. He turned identification into a discipline with rules, instruments, and trained hands. By the early 1880s, he had a working method, a filing scheme to retrieve any card in minutes, and one thing he badly needed, a real case that would prove it caught a liar. In 1883, it happened. A man was booked under a fresh false name, confident the police had no way to connect him to his past. Bertillon measured him, walked to his cabinet, and pulled the matching card. Same skeleton, different name, already on record. The prisoner had been caught not by a witness or a confession, but by the dimensions of his own body. The prefecture took notice. Over the next years, the system spread through France and then across borders, into Europe and the Americas. Police forces that had drowned in paper finally had a way to say, with confidence, "We have met you before." Measurements alone were not enough. Bertillon wanted the face on the card too, and he wanted it photographed the same way every single time. Before him, police photographs were a chaos of angles, distances, and dramatic poses. Bertillon imposed order. One shot facing the camera, one in strict profile, taken at a fixed distance under fixed light with the subject seated in a special chair. He standardized the framing so two photographs taken years apart could be compared honestly. This pairing of full face and profile, plain and unflattering, is the direct ancestor of the modern mugshot you still see today. He went further still, with what he called the portrait parle, the spoken portrait. It was a precise vocabulary for describing a face in words, so that any officer reading a card could picture a suspect or recognize one in the street. The shape of the ear, the slope of the forehead, the set of the nose, the chin, the lips, each broken into categories. The ear became a particular obsession, since its folds are nearly as individual as a signature. A description was no longer tall with a big nose. It was a code, exact enough to pass between cities and still mean the same man. The same rigor he brought to faces, he brought to crime scenes. Bertillon pioneered what he called metric photography, recording a scene from directly overhead with a measured scale, so distances and positions could be reconstructed later from the image itself. Where a body lay, how far a weapon had fallen, where a window had been forced. His albums of Paris crime scenes are eerily modern, calm, and clinical, treating the room as evidence to be measured rather than a spectacle to be gawked at. He had turned the messy aftermath of violence into something that could be filed, indexed, and proved. The method soon faced the kind of test that makes a reputation. In 1892, Paris was terrorized by a wave of bombings linked to the anarchist known as Radical. He had moved through the world under aliases, but he had been measured and photographed under the Bertillon system. When suspicion fell on a particular man, his recorded measurements and his standardized portrait helped tie the alias to the wanted bomber. The identification held. Ravachol was tried and condemned. For Bertillon, it was vindication on the front pages. His quiet science of calipers and profile shots had helped close a case that had gripped a frightened city. But fame pulled Bertillon somewhere his system was never built to go. In 1894, a torn note, the bordereau, suggested a French officer was selling secrets to Germany. Captain Alfred Dreyfus was accused, and the army wanted an expert to prove the handwriting was his. Bertillon was no handwriting expert. He had even called handwriting worthless for identification. Yet he accepted and built an elaborate, almost unreadable theory claiming Dreyfus had disguised his own hand to forge the note. It was confident, complicated, and wrong. On the strength of it and the prejudice around it, an innocent man was convicted and sent to a distant prison island. The public ritual was brutal. In January 1895, Dreyfus was marched into a courtyard, his rank torn from his uniform and his sword broken before the ranks, while crowds outside shouted for blood. He maintained his innocence the entire time. The case split France for a decade between those who wanted the verdict to stand and those who could not ignore the holes in it. Bertillon asked again to defend his analysis in 1899, only doubled down. The man who had spent his life building methods that could be checked and repeated had staked his name on a theory that could be neither. When the truth finally came out, it was devastating for him. A panel of France's most respected mathematicians examined his handwriting theory and concluded it was devoid of any scientific value. Dreyfus was exonerated and restored to the army. The verdict on Bertillon was quieter, but just as sharp. His genuine, careful science of identification now carried the stain of a famous miscarriage of justice, because he had lent the authority of the laboratory to a conclusion he simply wanted to be true. The lesson echoes through forensic science to this day. A method is only as honest as the person reading the result. The deeper blow to Bertillon's system came not from scandal but from a filing cabinet in Kansas. In 1903, a man named Will West arrived at the federal penitentiary at Leavenworth. A clerk took his Bertillon measurements, searched the records, and found a card that matched almost exactly with a photograph that looked just like him. There was only one problem. That card belonged to a different man, also named William West, who was already locked inside the same prison. Two separate men, nearly identical measurements, nearly identical faces, the same surname. The system that promised certainty had just confused two people completely. What finally told the two men apart was something Bertillon never built into his system: their fingerprints. The ridges on Will West's hands and the ridges on William West's hands bore no resemblance to each other. Where calipers and cameras had failed, the patterns on 10 fingertips drew a clean line between two nearly identical strangers. The case became the parable every later examiner would tell. Bodies could resemble each other. Measurements could collide. But a fingerprint, it seemed, belonged to one person and no other. The future of identification was being pressed in ink while Bertillon's cards gathered dust. Alphonse Bertillon died in 1914, his great system already being retired in favor of fingerprinting around the world. It is easy to file him under failure, but that misses what he actually did. He took identification, a guessing game of names and impressions, and insisted it be measured, standardized, photographed the same way every time, and checked. The mug shot on every booking record, the controlled crime scene photograph, the very idea that a body carries evidence that can convict or clear you, all traced back to a half-deaf clerk who could not stand disorder. His tools were replaced. His conviction, that crime could be caught with rigor, never was.